welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk. My name is JJ Barrett, and I'm the Extension Agent over in Wood County for WVU Extension. And of course, I have my co-host with the most, Evan Wilson, over in Cabell. Evan, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great, JJ. Getting ready for the Home and Garden Show here in 2 weeks. Got my speakers lined up for that, and we're full steaming ahead.
Okay. And of course, we have two special guests with us this morning. We have Dr. Ed Rayburn. He is our agronomy specialist for WVU Extension. Dr. Rayburn, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well.
Good. Has it thawed out any up in Preston County yet?
We've lost a lot of our snow, but the ground is still frozen.
Okay. And we have with us Nate Dean. He's a farmer. Nate, where are you from?
Pocahontas County.
Pocahontas County. And
Yep.
you have sheep, is that correct?
Yeah, we run a hair sheep flock.
Hair sheep, okay. All right, and of course we're going to talk about winter supplementation for our livestock. Got several different topics, subtopics in that heading that we want to talk about. But again, we want to welcome everyone to the program where we gather extension and industry experts to talk about topics that are important to West Virginia agriculture. And real quick, I wanted to go over our commodity minute. Looking at the Northern Ohio Grain Co-op, the price of corn for cash, these are cash prices, is $6.29 for shelled corn. Wheat is at $7.73, and soybeans are at $15.68. And just a couple places around West Virginia looking at our livestock market. Jackson County Livestock down in Ripley, they only had 46 head of feeder cattle, averaging $1.61. That was last week. And the stockyards at Buchanan, there was a group of 10 head of steers weighing 422 to 443 that brought $2.04. And when we worked up to our 600 weights, they were averaging around $1.69. So the feeder cattle prices are up a little bit. And we'll maybe talk about more about that later. But let's get into this week's topic, which is taking care of our livestock here in the winter. And I'll start out with Ed. Of course, we talked a little bit more before the program, but if we have some producers out there that are of course, we went through a rough 4 to 6 weeks. We've had some pretty cold weather. Animals may be experiencing some cold stress. We've had a lot of snow. If their hay that they are feeding this year, maybe it's not up to snuff, maybe it's a little low quality. What options are there out there for our producers to supplement if they need to?
Well, JJ, first of all, we need to encourage producers to be forage testing, using a good lab that analyzes the forage for the fiber and the fiber digestibility. The fiber digestibility is measured with the protocol that they call in vitro true digestibility. But having that digestible fiber tells us a lot more than if we just estimate digestibility from fiber content. Now, having that forage test, there's a little trick that we can do. And that's take the crude protein in the forage and divide it by TDN. And that's going to tell us, do we need a protein supplement or could we use an energy supplement with that hay? Remember, we're feeding bacteria in the rumen. And so this ratio is really telling us how well the bacteria are functioning. If we get a crude protein to TDN ratio below 0.2, I mean, think of it like 0.15, we need a protein supplement because the cattle or sheep don't have enough protein for the bacteria to digest that hay in a timely manner so the animal can eat as much hay as it could possibly eat. If your crude protein to TDN is greater, especially much greater than 0.2, you could actually feed hay, corn or barley with that hay to make the best use of the protein in the hay. And back in the old days when I was farming full time, I had a lot of alfalfa hay. And the best way to get the use of that alfalfa hay was to actually buy some corn, some ground corn to feed with it to get the best use out of that protein in the hay. So it does depend on the class of animal you're feeding. When I was feeding corn, I had young stocker cattle. I was buying 400 weight stocker cattle. And so that was the one way to get the best use out of that hay. So forage testing is what answers your question. Do you need protein, or can you use energy with that hay?
Couple follow-up questions for you there, Ed. Are there some what are some benchmarks for maybe we're talking to any classes of livestock as far as the is there a range of the total digestible nutrients or the TDN, the protein? Are there some and of course the fiber content, that NDF and ADF? Are there some kind of benchmarks that our producers, when they, because a lot of times they'll have questions, they get their forage test results back and maybe don't quite understand those.
Right. It's hard to give benchmarks. That's why we write fact sheets.
Okay.
We have fact sheets up there on the energy and protein requirements of different classes of cattle. I'm just going to use cattle for my example here, because if you think about it, if I have a dry cow that's in the second trimester of gestation, her energy requirements and protein requirements are quite low. But then as you go through the third trimester, and then especially when you go into lactation, those requirements keep increasing. So I'd encourage folks to go to our extension website under animal nutrition and download the fact sheet on livestock or cattle nutritional requirements, and then use that. Well, actually, there's another fact sheet that talks about how do we compare that forage test to that animal requirement to be the most efficient on the farm.
Okay.
You did ask about supplements. You mentioned the tubs. No, protein tubs are a good option. They are expensive in terms of unit of protein, but the nice side about them is it really reduces the labor. So you're paying cash to offset your labor. Other protein sources like soybean meal, corn gluten, or dried distillers are usually less expensive protein sources, but it takes more labor, and you have to ask yourself, are you going to feed it on frozen ground, or have feeders to feed it in? And then how do you get the feed out there without getting mobbed by the cattle? So
Right, that could be an issue.
the older you get, the more of an issue it is.
Yeah. Let's move over to Nate. We haven't had a lot of, he might be one of the first small ruminant producers we've had on. Nate, tell us a little bit about how many hair sheep that you run, and a little bit what your, I guess when you lamb and what your winter feeding program is.
Um, we exposed 175 females this fall um, to lamb in May, first week of May. We have basically no infrastructure as far as buildings go. So that works the best for us. We've lambed in the fall before, and that works well, except for the decreased percentage lamb crop we get lambing out of season. So we moved back to May last spring, had some challenges, but we're going to do it again. I think in my opinion, managing how you're going to feed in the winter starts in the spring. As far as not taking too much grass while you're there, for me, I manage all year long to make sure I have grass in the winter. And that, can go from anything from proper stocking rate, or maybe we're understocked compared to where we could be, but to use grass as the main component of your winter ration, you have to be thinking about it all year round. And our ewes are out on grass right now. I would consider us to have about, with the rams and everything that's over there right now, there's about 185, and I would consider that to be about 30 cow units, 30 dry cows. And we fed 18 round bales of hay this winter. And if we wouldn't have had 3 weeks of snow cover, we had a foot of snow and then some rain and then some freezing, and it crusted, and it got tough for them to dig through it. So that's where our hay came in, and our hay is low quality. That's pretty much what's available to us here, if you don't want to pay an arm and a leg for it. So in years past, I've supplemented with shelled corn. I've supplemented with soybean hull pellets. The soybean pellets work good, except for there is, this isn't an original idea of mine, but I like it. There's 2 things to consider. It's the cost of feed versus the cost of feeding it. And like Ed said, getting the feed put out without getting trampled by a mob of sheep can be an issue. And what we did when we fed the soybean hull pellets was feed them straight on the ground, 1 pound per head per day. And I did that as I was strip grazing. So, those pellets were going on clean ground. But the sheep get to learn what's happening, and then you have one blow through the poly wire and the rest follow her, and it becomes a mess. So I was looking for something different to do this winter, and I looked at tubs, and they're just sky high for what you're getting from them. So Kevin had been pushing soybean meal to me for about a year, and I kept blowing him off because I thought, how in the world am I going to feed soybean meal out on the ground? And finally, one day last summer, it clicked to me. I thought, why don't I mix it with my mineral and let the salt act as a limiter? And that's what we're doing this winter, and it's working pretty well. I had the goal of feeding a 1/4 pound per head per day of soybean meal versus 1 pound of hulls to get the same amount of nutrients. And right now they're taking in about 0.2 pounds per head per day of the bean meal. And I just mix it right in with my mineral. It's a really passive way for me to supplement protein. And I like it so far. It's working well for me.
Cool. That that's definitely a good idea there, Nate. I wanted to move back to Ed to get maybe a follow-up question on the. We talked about feeding shelled corn as an energy supplement. We can find it's readily available source for energy, but maybe talk a little bit about can we feed too much? Is there a limit we can feed per day per head before it starts interfering with our digestion of our fiber in our hay. And what do you recommend for that?
Well, that comes back to that crude protein to TDN ratio. If your hay is below 0.2 and you feed shell corn, you're actually going to have a major depression of digestion of the hay. And research will show that on those low protein hays, you actually don't get very much benefit from the shell corn. So that's actually why the protein tubs, okay, some of you are younger than I am, but once upon a time, they came out with just these liquid feed tanks, protein feed tanks. And it was basically molasses and urea. And they worked on poor quality hay because that urea stimulated urea is a source of protein. And it stimulated the bacteria to digest that low protein hay, and the cows could eat more hay. If you were to do the same thing with corn, you're going to actually depress the digestion of the hay on these low protein hays, and it's self-defeating. You're better off to feed the protein. Again, if you have a high protein hay, that ratio is over 0.2. Now I could use corn. Your question, how much? Probably around 1% of body weight is the max before you're going to start having significant impact on digestion of that high quality hay. But again, I'd want to have the forage test and do a little ration balancing, high school math, to take a look at that. Now, for cattle producers, we do have a tool on the web that allows them to go in and enter their hay analysis and the type of animal they're feeding, and see what is the impact of different feeds on meeting the needs of the animal. So if folks are interested in having a web-based tool, we have one there on the extension website.
Yeah, and maybe move to a little bit direction here. And I'll start with you, Ed, and then go back to Nate. How does cold stress affect our animals? And how much more percentage-wise, I guess, how much more will they eat? And then what are your recommendations to some of our farmers?
Well, the first thing is try to keep your cattle clean of mud and out of the wind, and when possible, out of the rain. That's the harder part. It's easier to keep them clean than out of the wind, and those are two of the big factors to help reduce cold stress. And cold stress will increase feed requirement. Going from 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit down to around 10 degrees, you've increased feed requirement somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on how much wind there is. Again, that tool that's on the web gives you that option of putting in the temperature and the wind speed to look at how much of an increase in feed requirement there is. But a little trick that I've used, especially on low quality hay in real cold weather, is to feed that protein before real cold weather. That stimulates the bacteria. And if you think about it, that rumen is a big compost pile. And adding that protein to the rumen, the bacteria get more active. The cow's going to eat more hay. but there's going to be more heat produced in the rumen to help keep that cow warm during cold weather.
Okay. Yeah, I think the isn't that kind of the for our ruminants, Ed, that rumen kind of acts like a big that big fermentation vat acts like a heater in the wintertime to help keep our animals warm. Is that correct?
It does. Yes.
Hey, JJ, I
Um,
got a question.
yeah. Yeah, Josh.
So Ed, we keep talking about hay, but I know that Nate and I know Greg on here and that picture you got behind you, what kind of forage quality do we have right now here in mid-February? Because Nate and I were talking about this yesterday especially on that picture he's got behind him. Those sheep are going through, picking out what little bit of green that they can find in that forage stand. And so, you know, I know while we talk about hay from a feeding standpoint in the winter, but those guys that are grazing through the winter, what kind of quality do we got?
That pasture is going to be most of the time better than the hay. Now, again, you can forage test pasture or stockpile feed too. And we can't downplay forage testing. In our working with farmers, when a farmer takes a forage test and uses it properly, they usually save $10 for every dollar they invest in a forage test. So having the right information, the forage test, is the best way to make decisions for saving money. And be it, if it's a pasture or stockpiled feed, you do want to watch the animals and see what are they eating out of there and try to mimic, what the livestock are eating. But to answer your question, deferred pasture in general is going to be as good or better than the hay you make.
Okay. Let's move to Nate. Nate, is there any, as far as shelter or anything you provide for your sheep if we get into some pretty severe weather in the wintertime? Is there anything you do different as far as your feeding program? What, if you say that everything gets below 10 to 20 or 10 degrees Fahrenheit?
We try to to give them somewhere where they can get behind a hill or behind a block of woods to act as a little bit of a windbreak. We don't have a lot of structure in our pasture. It's all leased pasture, and there's not a lot of trees on it that are within the fields. So we do our best to give them some sort of a hill or a bank to get down behind. We're also limited by water where we have good water and where we have water that won't freeze or won't freeze readily. So that, that plays into it with the temperature as well. And sometimes they have to tough it out a little bit, and you've just got to move forward and keep propagating the livestock that work in your situation. Not to make them suffer extremely, but there's no way we can provide really, really good shelter all the time. I agree with Ed completely on get them to eat as much forage and fill that rumen up as you can and let them produce heat. If I wasn't supplementing, I for sure wouldn't start supplementing the day it got cold, because their rumen's not adapted to that. So, and what we want her to do, or what I think we want her to do, is to fill her belly up. And if you dump a bunch of supplement out and they're not used to it and they gobble it down and overeat and go sick and get a bellyache and go off feed for 12 hours, well, that's the last thing you want her to do at 5 degrees. So just make sure there's ample hay out if they can't get to the grass, and let them get their belly full, and let them, if they just stand around and ruminate and not eat a whole lot for 24 hours, so be it, as long as they've got a belly full of something.
Yeah,
Nate
Nate
has a good point
ahead,
there. when I was saying I'd feed protein supplement, I'd be feeding protein supplement to cattle, kind of like Nate's feeding his protein supplement to his sheep. We're not talking a whole lot. We're talking a pound of soybean meal or 2 pounds of corn gluten pellets. So yes, no, Nate's hitting it right on the head. You don't need a whole lot of protein supplement to get that benefit.
Yeah, and Nate brought up a really good point as well that we wanted to talk about, and that's water. And maybe I'll stick with Ed and then go back to him. Something maybe we don't talk about enough, and maybe some of our producers experienced this when we had, more than a week of below freezing temperatures. Talk maybe Dr. Rayburn talk about the importance of water and importance of having that available to our livestock during the wintertime.
Okay. In cool weather, cattle need 3 to 4 pounds of water for every pound of dry matter they eat. Now, actually, if they're grazing deferred pasture with some snow on it, they're not going to drink much water in the water tank or watering system. They're going to get most of their water out of that fresh forage and the snow that's mixed in with it. If you're on dry hay, that's when you have to make sure that they're getting plenty of water. And if you think about an animal unit eating 25 pounds of dry hay, they're going to need around 100 pounds of water, which is 12 gallons of water to meet that need.
Okay, and Nate, maybe talk about, you said that if the temperatures get pretty severe, what water source do you have for your sheep?
Good luck with rubber tire troughs staying open, down to in the high single digits, 7, 8 degrees, as long as you let them overflow just a little bit. That black rubber seems to really soak up the sun no matter how cold it is. And if the trough overflows a little bit, it'll stay mostly open or just have a skim of ice on it. We don't have those everywhere. So if it's going to be bad, I try to get where I can access one of those. And we're lucky with the sheep, their water requirements are pretty low compared to a cow.
Yeah, now Nate, do you have any concrete water, like spring tanks, or all yours are the ones made out of the rubber tires?
Yeah, what we do have developed are rubber tires.
Okay, because if temperatures get pretty severe, we have several of the concrete spring tanks, and I usually I have a fence post in some of them, but as long as there's water flowing and you go out and crack the ice for them, that they can still get water. But this winter has been pretty tough, that's for sure. We had a question from the audience here. Nate, what's that, Evan?
Yeah, Evan's asked, Nate, how much soybean meal are you putting in that salt?
I'm mixing it to where they're taking about a little less than a 1/4 pound per head per day. And I'm just mixing it by hand, which is kind of a pain. If we get something dialed in that works good this winter, I'd like to find a mill that could, mix it for me, and then I just grab a bag and dump it in instead of mixing it all the time. But we're kind of in the science experiment stage of it still.
Okay. Maybe I'll go back to Ed for this question. Talk a little bit about there's always a lot of recommendations for winter feeding when we're talking about cattle, but we could also talk about sheep and goats. Separating the different classes, like separating if you've got replacement heifers from your cows, from your mama cows, or same thing with your replacement ewes or replacement does. Is that a pretty good? Do you recommend that management, or do you
That's,
think that? Oh, go ahead, Ed.
you know, I think that's pretty critical, especially using the two classes that, two of the classes that you mentioned. If I have that dry cow second trimester, her feed requirement's pretty low. But if I have a heifer, replacement heifer, she can benefit from better quality feed. Doesn't mean she needs supplement, but if I have forage test, I can know which hay works best with that dry cow versus which hay is going to be best for that young heifer. So yeah, separating animals into different management groups is very beneficial.
And Ed, we have a question on the Facebook Live from Seth down my way. Do you believe in Greg Judy's methods of feeding animals stockpile and rotational grazing? Can you maintain a herd of cattle by stockpiling, moving them daily? Is it possible to feed no hay at all throughout the winter?
Yes, that's the ideal situation. That's the short answer. And you mentioned the daily moves. That is ideal in terms of getting the most out of that stockpiled feed. If you let them have too big an area, they're going to walk on it, push a lot of it down into the ground and not be able to get it.
And to give a plug for the Appalachian Grazing Conference, I believe Greg Judy is the keynote speaker for this year.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Evan. I want to switch directions here. Maybe if we compare the last 4 to 6 weeks to the first couple weeks there in December, at least in our area, we had extreme wet weather. I think in a week we got over 2.5 inches of rain here in the Mid Ohio Valley. Give us your thoughts on the heavy use pads, Dr. Rayburn, for extreme wet weather or for winter feeding pads. I think is what NRCS calls them. They do have a cost share program for that. And what's your thoughts on that?
There are some farms that would benefit from that. If you're down on soils that don't have any rock in them, you're going to have a lot of problems. Now, I would go with the newer designs where you have the feeding area plus manure storage. Because we have too much nutrients in our hay that we can't just let it drop anywhere. It's a loss of money. If you think about it, a 30 cow beef herd fed over 100 days worth of winter, there's around $3,000 worth of fertilizer that's coming out of the back of those cows. And are you willing to throw away $3,000 or get that back out on pasture or hay ground where that fertilizer will grow more feed for you next year? Now, so when you get down in the big valleys of the Ohio, the Kanawha, some of those farms, I think, really would benefit from those programs. When you get up on the hills here, if you go back to your soil survey, if you have 15 to 20% stone fragments in your soil, I don't need a feeding pad. I'm better off either running my cattle on stockpiled forage. In Preston County, where I have too much snow to depend on that through January and February, that's where I get into bale grazing. And no, because I can have just too much snow, like Nate said. A cow can go through 18 inches of snow if it's fresh snow. But if you have 6 inches of snow that's packed down and frozen and ice covered, I'm not going to make cattle try to work through that. So that's where I'm going to use the bale grazing to get that manure back out on fields where it'll grow me more grass next year.
Yeah. And Nate, do you have any issues with severe wet weather where you could use a feeding pad, or do you have one of those for an area where you bring the sheep in to work them through a chute or anything?
No, I mean, we have a working facility for them, but as far as a heavy use area, no, we don't have a need for one. Um, keep them on fresh ground and don't let them bite it down to the nubs in the fall where you've got some sod to hold them up. And I don't have any use for one at all. And then with that heavy use area and that feeding pad, and then needing to haul manure and spread it back around, that's a lot of labor and diesel fuel that I don't have the time or money to spend on. The most efficient way to feed those animals is, I think, is with 4 legs in the mouth and let them spread their own manure.
Right. Well, amen to that. Nate, I mean, we may switch gears here a little bit, talking about hay, baling hay versus buying hay, and Ed can maybe talk more about the nutrients that are available in that hay as far as what it's worth for fertilizer value. Nate, do you have any hay making equipment, or do you buy all your hay?
No, we buy it all. I can't even begin to start to finance a line of old junk equipment to make hay with and make it pencil out. Not to mention the land I'm going to have to set aside and can't graze in order to do that. And I work full time off the farm. I don't see any way for us to get it done, or anyone who doesn't have a pre-existing non-financed line of equipment. It'd be really tough, I think, to make your own hay.
And do you, just to follow up on that, do you have any of that 4-H tested when you purchase hay, or you just have another farmer that you buy hay from every year?
We kind of just take what we can get, and we're just using hay strictly as a backup for situations where we can't graze. It would be interesting to know what it is as far as nutrient analysis, but I'd say it's probably not much. It's a little bit of scratch to keep the rumen working.
Are they 4x4s or 4x5s? What size are they?
They're 4x5s.
Okay, and let's move back to Ed. Maybe what his thoughts are on making your own hay versus purchasing hay, and about trying to think, Ed, what the nutrient value for the NP and K that's in a round bale hay, say a 4x5 bale.
Most people can buy hay cheaper than they can make hay. If you look at the real cost of making hay. And if you're buying hay, those nutrients are worth somewhere between $50 and $60 per ton, given last spring's fertilizer prices. This spring fertilizer prices, it's going to be higher yet. So one of the cheapest source of fertilizer is purchased hay.
Yeah, and remind our audience about what the isn't it something like there's about 40 pounds of potash and about maybe 12 pounds of phosphorus in a round bale. Is that somewhere around there?
That's a good starting number, yes. Better quality hay is going to have even higher levels.
Okay. Josh, we have Josh Poplowski with us from down in Greenbrier County. Do you have any questions for Dr. Rayburn or Nate? Okay.
No, that's what I just think that it's something to really look at as far as what Nate's doing there, and Greg with the standing forage out there, and not overlooking the value of that. I know a lot of our producers like to put hay out and they like feeding animals, but you know, there's standing feed there that I think that it's good to take a look at.
Yeah, some information that I sent to Nate and to Dr. Rayburn about the time that we either have our calves or we lamb, and I'll move back to Nate. Do you think, considering I know that you lamb in May, and of course that doesn't line up with the traditional Easter, the market for lambs is around the that week before Easter, as far as to capture that highest price. Do you think it would work for you to change the time that you lamb, or do you think that where you're at now is more profitable for your operation as a whole?
Yeah, we lambed in January once and we've never done it again.
Okay. Okay.
It was in 2019 in the polar vortex, and we only had 50 ewes, but it was a job. And you know, if a person had existing infrastructure, you know, an old chicken house, an old dairy barn, a bank barn type deal, and wanted to do that, I guess it'd work. And to me, it'd work more in an accelerated lambing type deal, you know, where you're lambing every 8 months, and one of those 8 months would be in January to target that market. But from a low input situation, I don't think it works. You know, we found a pretty good market for these lighter lambs, 60 pound, 65 pound kind of lambs there right after Thanksgiving for the Christmas market. And you know, the fall lambs, the late August, early September lambs, they worked well for that, but it just didn't get enough of them. So from a profit standpoint, these May lambs that are just never really pushed, if they only weigh 65 pounds in December and you don't have anything into them besides what it takes to keep their mama, then that's the most profitable for us. But if someone was going to lamb in that January time frame, definitely, you know, a terminal sire would be ideal in that situation to get those little lambs to really go and be ready to go for Easter. But for our situation being grass-based, it just doesn't fit.
Okay. And Nate, I've got a couple follow-ups for you. What breed of hair sheep do you have? And how many do they usually have multiples, or they just have single births? And do you use for some crossbreeding, do you use a different breed for as your ram for those lambs?
These ewes are Katahdin based. We've used some white Dorper rams, and those lambs are a little growthier. I've had a little more trouble with foot quality and parasite issues in those crosses. So where we've kind of ended up now is they're just a composite. And our goal is to this coming fall is to save our own ram lambs and use them. So I guess in a way, maybe we'll become more mongrelized from a breed standpoint, but in trying to select the sheep that work here, I think keeping our own ram lambs as replacements is going to be just as important as it's been to keep our own replacement ewe lambs. We have used Dorset bucks on the bottom half of the ewes before as a terminal cross for us. And I know Dorsets aren't in the wool sheep world considered terminal, but on a hair sheep, they added a considerable amount of growth, and that worked well in the fall, where those lambs aren't out on grass very long. You know, the time they do spend on grass, most of their nutrition is coming from their mother's milk. In the May situation this past year, the Dorset crossbred lambs did not work as well because of parasite issues. So moving forward, we're probably going to be straight hair on everything. Unless we would go into an accelerated type system. And that's where I think the terminal crosses would work the best.
Okay. That's some good info there. I'll move back to Ed. As far as our cattle farmers, we kind of have three camps. We have some people that will calve in April, May, spring calvers, and then some people that'll calve in the fall, and then some that'll do in January and February. What's your opinion on those as far as which one will be most profitable for our cattle farmers?
There are two big factors are what is your market and where are you located? Here in Preston County, I feel, okay, this is personal opinion as a farmer, okay, that starting to calve in middle of March is the best time. I'm at 2,000 feet because if I start calving 15th of March, that puts the cow and that calf, she's making a lot of milk just as that pasture's coming on. And I can actually flush the cow, kind of like we talk about flushing sheep. I think it does the same for a cow, having her on that high plane of nutrition when she's going into breeding. And my breeding would be in June for that type of animal. And these calves are shooting for being weaned 1st of September and then shipped to a pool sale in early October. If a person's not using pooled marketing with sales there in October, let's take the extreme. Go down to the southern Ohio Valley. It's a lot hotter. You have a lot more toxic fescue. And I know historically there used to be more fall calving down that way. And that's a good system for that area. Then the producer has to decide, if I'm fall calving, do I sell those calves in the spring when you have that high market and just have dry cows for the most part on that toxic fescue? Or do I try to do something with running those well, they're still calves, but running those older calves as stocker cattle and then selling them in August. So there's a place for both, but I think you have to tie it in with your market and your local environment, which is best for you.
Okay. Evan, do we have any more questions from the audience for Nate or Ed?
Not that I see in the chat box on the Zoom or on the Facebook side.
Okay.
I've got a question for Nate, JJ. I was just wondering, Nate, about you mentioned parasites, and you and I have talked about it before, but just for other folks that are curious, I know parasites is a huge issue for sheep. So what kind of additional control or limitation of parasites do you think you're getting from rotating those sheep around and keeping them moving?
It's got to help. We do our best to let a piece of ground rest for 60 days before we come back to it. In the winter time, sometimes that gets a little tough. Like in the next 45 days, I'm going to need to slow these sheep up a little bit to have them hit where I want them to, come 1st of April. But this time of the year is probably the best time for us to be in that situation. We have quit mass deworming our ewes. We've gone to only worming sheep that require it, and then calling those used. And we've seen some fallout from it. That's fact. But I think in the long run we'll be better for it. But I really think it's key to not push those sheep to eat down low on that first couple inches of the plant, keep them up grazing the tips, and then let that grass, let that ground rest and clean up for 60 days if you can. That gets me in trouble in the spring though, in the flush of grass, my grass gets away from me. So that's something, that's our next hurdle to cross, is what do we do to be able to stay with that grass in the spring? The answer is probably some cattle of some sort for a short period of time, for a couple months, to stay with that heavy grass growth.
Nate, do you use FAMACHA, the FAMACHA card, to look at the those animals that you're going to cull?
Yeah, we don't FAMACHA every time they come through the chute, but they're really only through the chute 2 or 3 times a year, hopefully. Most of the time you can pick one out. She'll start losing body condition, and then when you do catch her and do a FAMACHA on her, then it's usually pretty evident they need some help.
Okay, and
I've got a follow-up question, JJ.
okay, go ahead, Greg.
For both Ed and Nate, and both of you probably see, and I guess first, Nate, what is from rotational grazing, and I'm sure you've got paddocks that you've stayed off of, and I try to, just specifically to get turned out earlier. I think a lot of people think in our area, May 1st is a turnout date and quit feeding, and I like to think, the 1st of April. So I guess, what are your thoughts there? And do you see, from not overgrazing your grass, do you see a quicker response in the spring when it does warm up so you can turn out earlier?
I absolutely, that's the case from what I've seen. I think if a guy can do it and set aside a piece of ground in like August and just stay off of it, then I was able to do that one time here, and that grass came on just exponentially faster than anything else did in the spring. But even the stuff that we're making a pass across right now, the sheep aren't reducing the volume of forage there very much. They're just picking out the candy and the best stuff. And in most cases, by the 1st of April, unless I've got dairy quality alfalfa, I can't get the sheep to eat hay anyways.
Dr. Rayburn?
I agree with what Nate's saying there. The other thing to keep in mind is, what is your elevation and what is the aspect of your farm? As you get, well, Nate's even higher elevation than I am, but in my, for every 1,000 feet of elevation that you go up, that's going to make you somewhere between 7 and 10 days later in terms of how things are progressing. And if you have a north facing slope versus a south facing slope, that's going to have a big impact also. So now I have heard the other argument when you are having to feed hay, that are you better off getting the best use out of that fall pasture so that you reduce hay feeding in the fall? But yes, you may have to feed a little bit in that early part of the season before the grass really comes on. So, and with cattle, something that needs to be thought about, I take the 1st of May as average turnout time here at 2,000 feet in Preston County. But the grass is so lush for that first week, they actually need some long hay, or the cattle aren't going to be able to digest that spring pasture. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and a follow-up for Ed, the FAMACHA method that we use for basically we use that to check for the barber pole worm for our small ruminants, sheep and goats,
Hmm.
checking the eyelids. Talk a little bit about body condition scoring for our cattle and how we can use that as a management tool. Um, at least twice a year to look at our feeding program on the farm.
Uh, Cow body condition score is one of the most important things that you can look at, determine. Uh, to me, it's the starting of the nutritional program. Uh, I want a cow in body condition score 6 at calving because that cow is going to be the most likely to rebreed in a timely manner when breeding season comes. The easiest way to get good body condition score on a cow is wean that calf at a proper time in the fall. So the dry cow is out on good fall pasture for, I'd like it to be at least 60 days. And that'll allow that cow to build up condition. The old saying is a fat cow is half wintered. And if you think about it, that fat on the back of the cow is insulation during that cold weather that we talked about earlier. And if she is under an energy stress, she can take some of that fat and mobilize it and make that her energy source instead of feeding corn, for example.
Nate, we have a question for you from Facebook side. Can you keep sheep where you want them with just one polywire?
I can keep them with 2. I had them broke to 1 wire for about 3 weeks one time, and we bought a big group of ewes while we were still expanding, and that ended the single polywire. And I haven't had the gumption to go back to it again. I think I could. The key to keeping sheep with polywire is don't let sheep get hungry, because if they get hungry, they will move themselves. But yeah, I keep them with 2 most of the time, no problem at all.
That's all we have on the Facebook comments. I've seen in the chat box as well. But if anybody has any questions, throw them in there before we do in today's presentation program.
I think JJ's talking, but you're muted, JJ. You're still muted, JJ.
How about now?
There you go.
Yeah, I had a my dad always told me there's 2 types of music, country and western. So I have to move to Nate. Nate, are you a country music fan, and who is your favorite artist?
I don't care for new country music.
We get that a lot for some reason.
My favorite artist right now, I don't know.
You like the more traditional country?
Yeah, if I'm going to listen to country, I like Drive By Truckers. That they're kind of a red dirt kind of band.
Okay.
Southern rock.
What about Ed Rayburn? Are you a big country music fan?
I like it. Probably our biggest, my family's biggest artist was probably Alabama over the years.
Okay. Yeah, there's an old school group, the Oak Ridge Boys were actually in the Mid Ohio Valley last night. So they're pretty old school band there. But a lot of these older bands are still touring. So we have any more band. Yes. So no more questions from the audience, Evan?
Correct, JJ.
Okay. I would like to thank Nate and Dr. Rayburn for being our special guest here on Mountaineer Farm Talk. We really appreciate your time. We hope that some of our audience, gain some knowledge and some insight on some of the topics that we talked about. And I just want to invite everyone next Friday, February 18th. We're going to have Lisa Jones from the WVU Extension Service Small Farm Center. We'll be talking about the Small Farm Conference, which is coming up that last week in February. Friday, the 25th, we're going to have Shonda King from the Department of Ag and Dwight Wells. We talked about beekeeping, preparing for spring. And then Friday, March 4th, we have Dr. Mira Delanovich. She's our consumer horticulture specialist. She'll be talking about fruit tree pruning and management. So join us for those upcoming topics. And we just want to remind everyone that the programs and activities offered by West Virginia University are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political belief, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. So thanks everyone again for tuning in to Mountaineer Farm Talk. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll hope to see you next Friday. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.